tell that story, but that's the last time he ever used that word because he found out dumb is a dumb word to say.
Especially with a new wife, right?
Especially to your wife.
Okay.
A new wife.
Yeah.
All right.
Now you don't need a paper, Gerald. You know this by heart.
I just wanted to see which ones I wanted.
Yeah, these trying to fix the washing machine, the two sermons, that one, two sermons, give me a man, and
She had those?
No,
that's what
those are
you're
ones that
getting.
you need.
Those are going to be your stories today.
Oh.
Maybe,
So, and then-
do you need to put a mark by them?
oh,
Ryan?
we have marks by
Uh-huh.
them.
Those
So
are your-
only the ones with marks are the ones that
I
you
think I told the rest
needed
of
to
them.
tell. She told the rest, and then these here, you can add those too. But if you want to start with those, let me just give a little introduction here.
Well, they probably don't want to sit and listen to all this.
Oh, why not?
Oh, the
Yeah.
girls,
I do.
girls would like to hear the stories.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, they probably have heard them before, but they're always good to hear again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I like to hear him because he kind of misinterprets some of them.
Hence the interruptions, right? You need to correct the story.
Yeah, he tells his version of it, and then I tell what really happened.
Okay. Oh, go ahead. I have extra. All right, today is July 29th, 2009, and this is Ryan, and you saw the rest of us here. We're going to pick up with some footage from 3 years ago with Grandma. She told several stories, and here is Grandpa, who is going to add to those stories. And Grandpa, which one do you want to start with?
Oh, I think I'll start with when I went to North Mount Zion to try out for becoming pastor of the church. You want me to continue?
Yes. Go tell. What about that job? How did you become?
Well, in January of 1945, I sat beside of Dan Dick in one of the classes, and he'd been pastor of North Mount Zion Christian Church, and he said, "Are you interested?" He said, "Yesterday I resigned. I'm going as a missionary to Dominican Republic, and so I resigned the church, and they're hunting for a pastor." And I said, "Well, as soon as school's out in May, I'd like to take a church." So he called North Mount Zion, and they called me, and I went out the 1st of February, and tried out in the morning and in the evening, and after the evening service, I met with the board, and the board had met before I met with them, and their decision was that they liked me, and they would like me to become his pastor, but they said, "We feel we need a married pastor." Well, I thought for a moment, and I said, "I think I can take care of that." And so I'll just go back to Fort Wayne Bible College, and I'll find a wife. And I did. I went back, and I asked Violet if she would marry me, and she smiled, and she said, "Yes, I will marry
And
you."
in my mind, I thought, it's about time. Because we'd been dating for 3 years.
So that's all it took. Okay.
Sermon.
You could do the sermon one.
Because that takes us back just before Violet came to Fort Wayne Bible College in 1942. And she belonged to Woodburn Missionary Church, and they required all of their young people, if they were going to a Bible college, that they give a sermon before they went. And so Violet's sermon was given on Sunday night. Reverend Chris Gehrig was pastor, and he reported to me what she spoke on, what the title of her sermon was. And the title of her sermon was, "Give Me a Man." It's an Old Testament story about Goliath, that giant, said, "Give me a man." And so Violet pleaded with the people that she'd get a man. And so Reverend Chris Gehrig said the Lord answered their prayer. And I was the answer to their prayer.
Now tell them the straight story.
That's the straight story.
Tell them why I spoke on that. heard of
Well, she spoke on that because she'd heard my brother speak on that, and she was impressed with the thought of giving yourself to the Lord, and so, but she actually used the text, "Give me a man that we might fight together."
No, I didn't have that last part.
The last part. That's the last part of the verse.
That we might fight.
But I'll tell you then, I pastored it at North Mount Zion for 8.5 years. Then we went to Cleveland, and while we were in Cleveland, I think a year or so after we got there, a church on the east side, women were having a meeting and asked her to come and speak at their meeting. And so when Violet got home, I asked her, "Well, what did you speak about?" Well, she said, "I used that Old Testament text, 'I sought for a man, but found none.'" And I looked at that, and I said, "Violet, what do you mean? You sought for a man, and you found none? Didn't you find me?" And she said, "I'm never going to tell you my sermon titles again."
And I'm never going to use that topic again.
Okay, I'll just tell you, before, when I was a boy, my parents, of course, my father was a farmer, and I was brought up on the farm. I used to block beets. You'd put they'd sow the beet seed in rows, and then we had to go along and chop out all the after they came up, chop out all the beets and leave one about every foot or 15 inches. And I got pretty good at that because with this hand you had to kind of follow along behind the hoe, and if there were 2 or 3 plants all together, you just kind of sorted through them and pulled out all but one, and then you just kept on sowing, kept on hoeing, and I liked that. And I not only blocked the beets for my parents, but I even got jobs otherwise. And at that time, I was a pretty good job. I earned enough money to buy a bicycle, and that was my joy. And I not only blocked beets, but we picked tomatoes. And when we picked tomatoes, I hate to tell this, but sometimes I have a brother Ralph, and I have a sister Mary Evelyn, and all of us would be out there in the patch, and we'd find a rotten tomato, and you know, we yielded to temptation, and we'd take that rotten tomato and throw it at somebody else, and of course, as long as you were hitting somebody, it was great. But when somebody hit you, it wasn't very nice of them, you know. But I did a lot of that. Also, my brother Ralph and I, when we were boys, we did all the milking of cows. My father just turned it over to us, and we'd have to do that. And we'd milk for a little bit, and then we had a basketball goal in the barn, and we'd just go out and shoot baskets. And my mother would say to my dad, "Those boys are taking a long time milking tonight." And my father, he was an easygoing person, and he'd say, "Oh, they'll get it done. They'll get the milking done. They're probably playing a little basketball," and we were, of course. And but I enjoyed the farm. Sometimes in the morning, I'd go out and husk a shock of corn before going to school, and then I'd ride my bicycle to school, and we worked hard. We learned to work hard as boys.
Tell about when you milked the cows. What did you do in kind of ornery when you milked cows?
Well, I shouldn't tell this because it doesn't sound very good, but sometimes when I'd be milking a cow and my brother Ralph would pass by to go out and empty the milk that he'd gotten, I would just take the the tit of the cow and squirt some milk on it. And he didn't like that. And you know what he would do? He'd come over and he'd hit me on the arm. Oh, he'd hit me really hard. And but Ralph and I got along really well. We really did. We had a lot of fun. Sometimes we'd kind of get disgusted at each other, but we really loved each other. And we still love each other. We really do. I'll have to tell you, when I was in grade school, this was, I suppose, about the 6th grade, we didn't have a radio at home. There was no radio. We had no electricity, and we didn't have any radio. We didn't have any battery radios. And I learned to make a crystal set. You take, wrap wire around a spool, and then have it so that the wire, another wire would touch those wires, and have that wire connected to a crystal set, and you connect some earphones. And we picked up the radio stations in Fort Wayne. WOWO, we could get that. And I think it was WGL, we could get that. And, well, that was a wonderful thing. My, such a wonderful thing. You could hear what was going on in Fort Wayne, just hear right on your ear. Wonderful thing. Wow. So I enjoyed that. I have to tell you, though, while I was in school, I bought a camera, and the camera had flash bulbs. In order to take a flash picture, you had to get flash bulbs, and the flash bulbs looked somewhat like a regular bulb. But of course, when you'd screw it into the place and flash it, that was the end of it. That was the end of the flash bulb. And I had about a half a dozen of those that I left upstairs when I got married, left them upstairs. My dad saw those. And one day the bulb in the chicken house burned out. And he thought, I know where some bulbs are. So he went upstairs and he got one of those bulbs and brought it out and unscrewed the old bulb and screwed the new bulb in and pulled the cord, and just like that. And, oh, what's wrong? Must be something wrong with electricity. Well, I'll try it again. Maybe that was just a bad bulb. So he goes and gets another bulb and screws it in. And, well, I was out in Ohio, and Ralph was pastor at Yoder, and so he came out, and Ralph, he said to Ralph, "Did you come out?" And he said, "There's something wrong with electricity in the chicken house, because screw a bulb in and it just burns the bulb out." So my dad went and got another bulb and brought it out and screwed it in, and like that. Ralph said, "I don't know what's wrong. You'll have to ask Gerald when he comes." Well, the next time I came, why, my dad said, told me his trouble. Well, I said, "Go get a bulb." And as soon as I looked at it, I knew what it was, and I began to laugh, and I said, and I called him Papa. "Papa, that's a flash bulb, and it's supposed to flash like that. You need a bulb that is a regular bulb." And so he learned something, and I got a big kick out of that. While I was at Continental, at the North Mountain Zion Church, they learned that I was born on a farm, so of course we made very little salary there, and so I would hire, if they needed somebody to help them, I would help them, and sometimes they paid me a little money, sometimes they didn't. But I was helping a fellow thrash, and I was out in the field pitching the bundles up on the wagon at that time. A little bit later, they picked them up with buck rakes, but I was helping pitch them up, and a rat ran up. I saw the rat coming and ran right up my leg, and The fellow was nearby, and he said he never saw anybody take off his pants as quickly as I did. I just ripped my pants off, or didn't rip them, I just got them off quickly to get that rat out of my. And that fella, every time he'd see me after that, he'd laugh and tell me how quick I could act when a rat was running up my leg. You told about the washing machine, did you, Bob?
No, she didn't.
I saved that for you, but now tell it straight.
Okay, I'll tell it straight. When we moved to Continental, we didn't have a washing machine. We didn't have any money to buy any. But I went to a sale, and they had 2 old Maytag washers. And they were real old, but neither one of them worked. But they auctioned off, I think I got them for about a quarter a piece, something like that. And I took both of them home and found the good parts of one and the bad parts of another, and I take those off. And I was able to put together a washing machine that worked. But the problem was the shaft in the wringer where you put a pin in was kind of worn, and after about 2 or 3 weeks, that pin would break because it was worn so much. And so I'd go into town, go into Continental, which was about 5 miles, 6 miles, and get a special steel pin. And brought it home, put it in. A couple more weeks, so I'd break, and I'd have to get another one. So finally, one day, I just took an 8-penny nail and stuck it in. And that 8-penny nail lasted just as long as those pins that I'd been getting at Continental. And so I just stick the 8-penny nail in, and it would work. Well, one day, when Mom was doing the washing, I was about 5 miles from home, helping the person that we live, Buff Zimmerman, helping him ditch. And we had a ditching machine, and they'd have a tile lined up, and you'd follow behind the ditching machine, which was a deep hole about 3 foot deep, and you'd have to take these tiles and lay them in like this, just one after another. And a girl from the house, the girl that went to our church, came out and said, "Violet called and the washing machine broke and you have to come home immediately." Well, I said, "I can't come now because I'm the only one here, and you have to follow this machine. You just have to, it has to be somebody here, otherwise he's got to shut down the machine. And so go back and call her and tell her to stick a nail in it." So she did, and about an hour later she came back and she said, "Violet called back and said, you gotta come home immediately, it's terrible." And just then another fella came and he was able to take my place, so I got in the car and I went home and looked at it, and what happened, Violet opened the lid where you needed to do it and looked in there and saw these gears.
Well, I couldn't find a
going
hole.
around, but she didn't see the hole where you put the 8-penny nail in. So after a while, she just stuck it in between 2 gears that were
Because it
going
left a
around.
hole when the gears
and
went around.
those 2 gears just went like that, just all broke to pieces. And there I go home,
And this is what he said.
and this is what I said: "You dumb
Woman.
And you know, that wasn't very popular at all. We'd only been married probably maybe less than a year, about a year, something like that. And those were not popular words. That was not a popular word. But a little bit later, and you told about the hat, didn't you?
Yes, I told about the hat.
And when we were coming back from our honeymoon, actually, coming back from our honeymoon, and I looked at Mom, and she'd had a hat on, and it made her look very, very funny. And I should have used that word, I guess. Maybe that'd have been a better word. But I said,
Now I know why you've been looking so dumb.
Yeah, that's
It's
right.
that
Now I
hat
know
you
why
have
you've been And again, after that, I determined I was never going to use that word dumb. But at that time, that was the word dumb was a word almost like, what do some of the words that become very popular.
Well, I can't think of any that were worse than dumb.
But they're words, that everybody's using. Well, everybody was using the word dumb, and so that was just kind of the word that I used. But it wasn't a very popular word. Very, very bad. And
Not popular in your house.
when I was at North Mount Zion, I'd been there about 8.5 years, and I was thinking it was probably about time to move on. And I got a call from the Central District Superintendent, and he asked me if I was interested in another church, and I said, yes, I am. And I got a call from the Cleveland Church, First Missionary Church in Cleveland, wanted to know if I would come and try out there. And I said, I'm just a country boy. I've never been in a big city, and I don't think I would like to live in the big city. So I refused it. Well, a couple of weeks later, they called again. And again, I said, no, I don't think so. Well, a couple of weeks later, they called again, the third time. And they said, we'd really like to have you come and just see our church and try out. So I turned about and I said, I think maybe I better do it. So we went to Cleveland, and we really had a nice time, a nice Sunday, and we just liked the day. And they gave us a 100% call, and we went as pastor. Well, I have to tell you about a couple of men at Cleveland Church. They didn't come to church. They lived just down the street about a half a block. And I really didn't know them. I'd met one of the men just on the street, and he knew that I was pastor of the church. And one night, about, it was after midnight, this man came to our door and woke me up and got me up and said, oh, I need help. I really need help. They've just set our furniture out of the house, out by the street, and we don't have a place to live. We don't have a place to stay anymore. Well, these two men, they were both in their 60s. They lived with their mother all their life. They were never married. They lived with their mother, and their mother just took care of them. Their mother cooked for them. Their mother paid all the bills that were necessary, the insurance bills, the taxes, and all of that. And she had died about almost a year before this. And the boys didn't know how to do business at all. They didn't know, they'd get bills. They didn't know they had to pay them either. They didn't know anything about that. And they were not dumb boys. They were smart boys. They'd listen to the news, and they knew what was going on, but they did not know how to pay anything. And they didn't pay their taxes, and they get notices that if you don't pay them, you're going to be evicted from the house. And so that happened that night. And so I went down, and I said, in the morning I'll come down and see what we can do. And I went down to a housing place and found an apartment for them. And I went and I said, now, they needed some furniture in this apartment. And I said, now, what furniture do you want? They couldn't make any decisions. They didn't know. I said, do you want this? No, we don't know. Do you want this article for? Oh, I don't know. They couldn't make any decisions. So Violet and I had to make all the decisions, what they needed. Violet went down and bought some curtains for them, put some curtains up, and we set up their house for them. And then for a while, I think she pretty much cooked their meals for them, but they finally got so they could kind of take care of themselves. But two men, 60 years old, that were actually smart men, but didn't know their mother had just made all the decisions for them. A sad situation. And those, especially the one man, kept coming to our house. Even after this, he'd stop in all the time. And
11 o'clock at night and want something to eat.
yeah.
Oh my.
I'll tell one more story. That's
Okay.
kind of a sad thing, but while I was in Cleveland, we had a man who worked in a funeral home. He was just about ready to take his, have his own funeral home. He was in our church, and whenever they would have a funeral, and it was right downtown, and a lot of people died, and they weren't going to church at all, and they would say to the undertaker, "Well, we don't have any pastor," so Leroy McHugh was his name, would contact me, and I had 45 funerals in one year, 45 funerals. And one of those funerals, when I went to the funeral home, I never knew that most of the people that had funerals for it, but I'd just go and have the funeral. But when I walked in the funeral home, Leroy said, "Come over here in the room," and he took me over and he told me the story, what had happened. The man that had died owned 5 hotels in Cleveland, and he had a colored maid that was the head of all the hired help, the maids in all of the hotels. She'd do the hiring of them and firing and so forth. And this man died. I mean, this man's wife died about 2 years before this, and after he died, then I think it was after about a year, he married this colored woman. He was a white woman. He married this colored woman, and he didn't tell his family. He had about 3 children. He didn't tell his children. And then after he died, the children came into the funeral home, and they said, "Well, we've come in to make arrangements for the funeral." And Leroy said, "Well, arrangements have been made. His wife just came in a while ago and made all the arrangements." His wife? He isn't married. Yes, he was married a number of months ago. And so there was real war there. And what was going on is the family, the children, said, "We got to take an autopsy." Autopsy to find out what they felt maybe she killed him in order to get his money, because he had a lot of money, and she was the one that was going to get the money. So they said, "We're going to go ahead with the funeral, but we daren't go to the cemetery and bury the body." And but that was a funeral where you could just feel the fire flying, because the children were there and his wife was there. But oh, there was a terrible feeling at the funeral. And
So what did the autopsy reveal?
huh?
Did you ever find
I
out?
never heard
found
the
out.
result
Okay,
of
interesting.
what happened. I
Okay.
often was going to ask him, but I forgot it.
Yeah.
So I think that's about all. That's far enough.
Grandma, did you ever tell the story about the basement, what Dorcas, when she went in the basement? I don't know if you ever told that one.
I'm
I
not
don't know
sure
if you
I
ever
did
told it.
either.
I'll just have you tell that one.
We were often invited to the home, the Alof family home, and Elizabeth was a real good cook and a real bad housekeeper. Because every time we would go, I would have to wash the dishes so we could set the table for the meal, and then before the meal was quite ready, we'd go in and sit down, and Gerald would go sit down in the living room, and so they'd have to clean off the couches and things because they had them piled high with stuff. And then Lois, the only daughter, the only child they had to run down the basement to get something for her mother for supper, and Dorcas went with her because Dorcas was just a little girl. And when she came back up, she came into the living room and announced, Mom, you should see their basement. It's a mess. And Harvey, the husband, he just got so tickled. He was laughing and laughing, and I was so embarrassed.
Oh, yeah. Good stories.
Have
Okay.
you told the purse one with Dorcas?
Hmm?
The purse one where we were at Shipshawana, I think, and
Oh, the person.
when you left, we have a lot of purse stories, but
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you did tell
My purse story at Shipshawana. I won a trip to Shipshawana to stay overnight at the inn there because we all, Grandpa and I always called over phone-a-thon and we raised the most money, so that was my gift to stay overnight free. So we thought, well, since we have a free night there, we'll invite Dave and Dorcas. They were home on furlough, and we'd invite them to come with us too. So I went in to to find out where our room was and so forth, and Gerald and Dave stayed out in the car waiting for us, and Dorcas went in with me, and I set my purse up on the counter, and then I was talking to the lady about the room, and my the phone in the purse rang, and so Dorcas picked it up and went off to some corner to answer the phone. And then when I got done, I went out to the car. Dorcas disappeared, and I went out to go to the car, and Dorcas said, "Mom, where's your purse?" She said, and so I said, "Oh dear, I must have left it back in there." So I go back into the inn and to get my purse, and it wasn't there. And I said, did you see the purse that I had on the counter here? Did you find it? And she said, "Oh yes, there was a woman standing at the end of the counter, and I saw her take your purse, and she went out." Well, then when I went out, these guys in the car were just laughing their heads off. Dorcas had taken the thing and hung it on her shoulder like she does her purses, and there she sat in the car with my purse hanging on her shoulder. And I'm running in after a purse that she had. So we told the ladies then, and those ladies at the counter, they never forgot that it was, I went in and told them that that was my daughter that took my purse out of the car. But I never let Dorcas forget that, because she's always after me, you know, I'm forgetting my purse all the time, and here she forgot she had my purse on her shoulder.
Good story. Good story.
I was glad that happened.
You can tell them about the purse that you left at the fair, Graybill Fair.
Oh. The first week in September, Graybill always has a fair, and we like to go to it, so we went to the fair, and we ate at a hamburger stand, which was directly across the street from a little antique bookshop. And there was another lady and two ladies with a granddaughter sitting in the same row of chairs that was in front of the hamburger shop. I put my purse down on the floor, but a lot of people were walking by, and so I kind of pushed it under my chair. And then we had to go to the hospital, up to the Lutheran Hospital up north on DuPont. And I got ready to get out of the car, and Grandpa always lets me off at the door, so I went to get my purse, and I thought, oh, I don't have my purse. I left it back at the fair. So and Dad said, well, why don't you go in and see if they have or the guy that opened the door for me, he said, why don't you go in, they have a telephone directory in there, and Gerald said, well, I think, why don't you look for that shop, you know, see if that shop has a telephone number in the book. That was just across the street from where we were. So I go in there, and the lady at the desk there, she hunts the book, and she looks it up, and we find the number, and I call this little store, antique bookstore, and they said, oh, you know what? We just heard, Violet Ringenberg, we have your purse at the information booth. The whole fairground heard it because it's not that big. So she said, why don't you hang up and I'll just go check to make sure that we actually have the purse. And so I hung up, and then she called back and said, yes, we have the purse. So Dad said, well, on our way home we'll stop by the fair and pick it up. So we did. We stopped by the fair, and I walked up to the information booth, and she said, "Oh, I'll bet you're the woman that left her purse here." And she said, "We looked in it and found your name, and made the announcement. Now here's your purse. Everything is right here in it." And so as I was walking back to the car, WBCL, the radio thing, had a booth there, and the wife of one of the professors that worked with Roger was standing at the booth. She was operating the WBCL booth, and she said, "Violet, I just heard your name. You lost your purse, didn't you?" And I heard over the loudspeaker that they found it. Well, I'm glad they found it for you. But she said, "You know, that's just kind of a woman thing." WBCL was up at Angola, much north of Fort Wayne. And she said, we were up there, and when we got home, I had left my purse up at Angola, and I had to make a trip all the way up there. Well, then a number of weeks, maybe a month or so, how long was it after that we went back to the hospital? Someone was in the hospital, and this same lady was at the desk, and she said, "Well, I see you have your purse with you."
Oh, my.
And then a number of weeks later, we were there again, and she came walking out of the place where they go to get prepped for surgery, and she saw me, and she said, "Oh, you have your purse, don't you?" She gave me a big hug. Like, it's remarkable that I still remembered to have my purse. But that was amazing to me, that out of all the countless people they see, she remembered, probably because she looked it up in the directory and everything, she remembered that I was the lady that lost my purse or left it at the fair. Well, I give Grandpa lots of opportunity to retrieve my purse.
But it's hardest when she leaves them in the nursing home. There was a woman in the nursing home, and you had to walk down a hall, then down another long hall, down clear to the back of the nursing home. And we got out to the car, and Mom said, "Oh, I left my purse there in that room." So I go back. I didn't mind walking in, and sure enough, the purse was there. The lady said, "I just noticed it," and she kind of laughed a little bit. And then I started out with that purse, holding that purse. And along the way are all these women, and they're looking at. So I just keep saying, "This is my wife's purse. This is my wife's purse. She left it here." And those women just kind of laughed. And she did the same thing. We went to a funeral, went to a wedding at a Catholic church, and we sat clear to the back, and Mom left her purse
Right
there.
beside me on the bench, right beside me on the bench.
And we went out to the car, and she got in. She noticed her purse was missing. So I had to go back, and all these people were standing around. I found the purse, and all these people were standing around, and as I walked out with that purse, they'd gawk at me. "What's he doing?" And so I just kept walking along. I said, "This is my wife's purse. This is my wife's purse. This is my wife's purse." They'd smile.
Probably one of the times I didn't lose my purse, but we had a picnic. The Rehoboth Church had a picnic at the lake, Skinner Lake, and I took a salad, and I took that big spoon that I had in the casserole today. I had that in my purse to put in my salad, and when I got there, I put the salad on the table and said, "Oh, Gerald, I had a big spoon for this salad, but I left it. I had it in my purse, and I left my purse at the church." And so he said, "No, don't worry about it, because they probably have one in the cabin there at the house at the lake." And they did, and then on our way home, we stopped by our church, and while we were driving from the lake, which is just a couple miles from our church, I picked up my purse, and I took out the phone. I had the cell phone in there and wanted to put it in the center between our seats, because we can hear the cell phone ring better than when it's in my purse. So I took it out of my purse and put it in the seat, and then I took out my little bag that I have the church key in, so I could open the church door and go in and get my purse. Then I set the purse back down on the floor. So I was outside of the car with my key to go into the church to get my purse. And Gerald said, "What's this thing sitting down here on the floor?" "Oh, that's my purse." So I went, what in the world is going on? And then I had to go to the chiropractor a couple days later, and Sue in there, she always says, well, Violet, what funny story do you have to tell us today? She says, you always have the best stories. So I told her this story, how I had the purse in the car, you know, and my spoon, everything. I told her the whole thing. And she said, Violet, that's not a funny story. I want you to tell that story to the doctor. So I told the story to the doctor, and he got this funny look on his face. He said, that's not funny. He said, either you had a stroke and didn't recognize that that was a purse. You didn't even know that that was a purse. Or he had been giving me some kind of a vitamin that was made from flowers and stuff, you know. He had been giving me that to stir up. It's supposed to stir up the little stones in your gallbladder so that they'll pass. And it was stirring up those little stones. I was really having gallbladder attacks and so forth. And he said it must be scrambling up your mind. And my feet began to hurt too because I have gout. I have trouble with gout. And that's caused from granules in your feet that get stirred up so it feels like you're walking on needles. He said, it's either that you either had a stroke, and I don't see any other symptom because you have good use of your hands and you don't have slurred speech or anything. So I think it might be coming as a reaction from that medicine. You're allergic to it. So I had to stop taking it, and he said it'll take about 3 weeks till it gets all out of your system. And then when I came back home, and I had a pill in my purse I was supposed to take. And I had it in my purse in a bottle. But I thought it was something else, you know. So I told Gerald, I hope I get along all right without that pill. But when I got home and looked into it, there had been in my purse all the time, but I didn't recognize it as my pill to take. And I had been writing on the back of some pictures the names of the people. And I wasn't writing the right names on the back of the people that I knew. I was writing other people's names on it. So I'd been doing a lot of dumb things before I ever
Wait a minute.
didn't.
What word did you use?
Dumb. Talking about me doing it. So I finally got straightened out, but I noticed a lot of funny things I had been doing that I wasn't even aware
While you were taking
of
that
doing
medicine.
while I was taking that medicine. Because I'd been taking it for a number of weeks, you know, and it was confusing my mind. He said it's stirring up something in your mind and your brain.
Well,
Scrambled.
Thank you guys for
It's really
these.
scrambled when you don't recognize a person you're going into the church
Yeah.
to get your purse that you just took the keys out of. So Gerald never gave the end of the story because it was, somebody told me that was the funniest purse story they had heard. We didn't want to ruin it for
You don't
me.
Well, thank you guys. I don't know if I introduced you guys. Sarah and Catherine were sitting and listening here today. And then Jennifer,
Yes.
of course. Okay. Any other stories that you guys think that was a lot? 45 minutes worth of stories.
Was it?
So
Oh,
that was good.
You didn't hear
Okay.
my sock story either, I don't think.
That's
Did you?
long
You
enough.
ever hear my funeral sock story?
Tell us that. You may have told that one, but
Yeah,
go ahead
I
and share
put
it.
that on there?
When-
I'm not sure.
I don't think so.
One of the men in our church, a single man, died, and he didn't have much family or anything. So the funeral only had about 50 people at the funeral, and Grandpa had the funeral because he had been in our church while we still pastored here. So he went down to the church early. Usually we go down together when we go to a funeral, but he went down early, and then I went later. And about all the people, well, I knew all the people, and they all gave me hugs. You know, I was just getting a hug from everybody. And then I went into the auditorium for the funeral. And then after the funeral, we came out of the auditorium and went down to the dining area and ate. And then everybody was gone. And by that time, Grandpa and I were getting ready to go home. And as we walked down the aisle to go to the car, Grandpa looked and he says, "Violet, why are your socks where they are?" I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, they're down there by your ankles." And so I said, "Oh, well, my skirt's pretty long. I don't think anybody noticed." So I pulled up my socks, knee highs, and then I went into the bathroom, and when I looked in the mirror, here was a pair of black shoes, black socks, about this much above my shoes, and then about this much white leg, and then a black skirt. And I got the giggles as I looked in this mirror at this old lady with her socks down around her ankles. So then when I walked out of the bathroom, Judy Steinman still happened to be there. And I said, Judy, did you notice my socks were down by my ankles? She said, yeah, I noticed it when you went into the auditorium, but I just thought you were starting a new style, and that's what And then the secretary was in her office, and I said, Sarah, did you notice? Yes, she said, I noticed, but I know your legs swell, and I thought you couldn't pull them up any higher.
Everyone has a good reason.
But you know, I was well balanced because they were both at the same place down around my ankles. One wasn't pulled up and the other one. This was on a weekday, and on Sunday when we went to church in the evening, Judy's husband said to me as I came in the door, he said, Violet, do you need any help pulling up your socks? I said, did you see that too? He says, yeah, I did. I said, that's probably why everybody was hugging me. This old woman needs encouragement. Oh, but every time I think of that, the vision, the picture that made, it just strikes me so funny. If I'd had tan socks on, it would have been quite as conspicuous.
That is pretty funny. And the black skirt.